there's this genuine need for growing each other for their own benefit, not for our benefit. So I feel like, coaching in a lot of organizations is what's going to happen there, where everybody will be trained as a coach, like genuinely trained as a coach.
Welcome to today's episode, where we're thrilled to have Zaynab, a powerhouse in education consulting and coaching. Zaynab has been transforming teaching and learning with her innovative strategies for over 15 years. Today, she'll share her secret on elevating teachers' competencies, unleashing the potential of high-impact teaching strategies, and the magic of learning walks. Get ready for an enlightening session that promises to reshape how we think about education. Let's jump right in and discover how Zaynab empowers educators to excel and inspire. Thank you so much for being here on SELINTalks. It is our pleasure. How do you feel today?
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. When I first was given this opportunity, I thought, what better way to continue talking, because that's something I love to do, and then talk about education and the great things that are happening here on our end of the world.
That's amazing. Before we start the entire thing, I like to do something called an icebreaker question. So for you, as someone who is deeply involved in education and transformation, if you could have witnessed one historical educational reform or event in person, what it would be and why?
There's so many that we could consider when it comes to education reform. And over the last few years, there's been heaps that has been happening. More recent times, we've got the implementation of STEM technologies, which is, the buzzword now. And I'm experiencing a lot of my colleagues now upskilling themselves. And one of my dear colleagues has, the great task of facilitating STEM into all of her classes and lessons, which is not a problem because she's tech trained. But then getting other teachers in other key learning areas to develop STEM activities can be quite challenging. That was a really interesting one. But the other one that we're also focusing, and I think that's really, really important, is project-based learning, particularly because we know that students don't all learn in the same manner that have, what we've been doing in the past, which is that kind of rote teaching, and the expectation that students are just adapting to whatever the teacher's doing. So the implementation of PBL has been probably one of the greatest, although it's still in its teething stages, and some people do it well and others not so well. It's a great opportunity to consider the different learning abilities of our students, and then maybe even consider the assessment phase, and then shifting away from the typical exam style assessments that determines a lot of our students' futures. So that was one that was really, really good. One that I work in now at the moment, part of my role in a school, as well as through the consulting that I do, is that of accreditation. And over the many years that I've been teaching, accreditation has changed so many times, and essentially it's just a regulation of the teaching standards that teachers have to abide by. And we're finding that they change quite often, not for the worse. They get better, but at the same time, it gives the teachers an opportunity to continuously learn and adapt to the changes within the regulations, but to meet the needs of the students as well. So I think that's another really important one. And I know you said one, but I just gave you three, so
Yeah.
I couldn't help it.
No, that's amazing. Now let's talk about your own journey. What sparked your passion for education consulting, and particularly in the areas like instructional leadership and literacy?
So when I started, when I finished my degree and close to the end of that, I started working casually. And then when I completely finished my degree, I started teaching as a primary teacher. And I was doing that for a very short period of time. But when I did start that, there was this presumed knowledge that anyone that has a degree automatically knows how to teach, and they have this understanding of classroom management and pedagogy. And at that time, we didn't have access to technology in the classroom that is going to engage the students. So we had to really think about engaging them in ways that don't require anything additional. So that was the start of my journey. But not long after that, I went into my key learning area as a high school English teacher. And I worked through those, in that for a few years. And then I became a head of department. And during that time was where the ability to shift some of the literacy practices at our school was essentially, given to me. And when you're given a platform like that, you really start to thrive in the opportunity that may come about. So with my faculty, and my focus purely when I did take on that head of department role was to empower my team, because it was never about me being the leader of the team. It was about how we can lead collectively, and ensuring that I could empower them meant that they were able to raise some of the things that they really wanted to share. They weren't fearful or anything that their ideas were not valid. So I created a safe space for them really to allow us as a faculty to thrive. And when we developed a reading, like a reading literacy program where we had our students reading texts that are relevant to them, because we found that they weren't reading, and a lot of the literacy challenges came from the fact that they just wouldn't read. We started to shift the texts. Particularly in boys' education, we found that some texts were more interesting to them, and then we bought a whole heap of them. We had them reading in class, and I found that a class that I taught particularly, which was a Year 9 boys class, they were so eager to come into class every day and want to continue reading that book, and it had never happened before. So that was the literacy component. There's other teachers now at that school which focus on the literacy development, because now I'm an instructional leader and an instructional coach at a school, alongside the consulting and the coaching that I do external. But that is all about how I can further develop teachers that come into the field who were just like me, who had no idea what they were doing, and university didn't prepare them for what was going to come when you walk into a classroom and you have up to 30 students just staring at you and waiting on every word, and in an instant the whole classroom management that you had implemented and worked so hard for can just be shattered. So it's really about learning those the opportunity to be reflexive and adaptable to whatever comes your way, and not assuming that, just like us as teachers, we can't be doing everything, and we don't know everything. And the same thing with our learners, like they don't know everything, and each of them learn at a different pace. So just bringing back the reality of the teacher expectation, so that no one feels like their expectations are too high, and if their goals are unachievable, they're only going to feel disappointed. So
yeah, your coaching also, you mentioned your coaching, that you have been as an international instructional coach, right? Is that what you mentioned? Your coaching has also played a key role in shaping teacher development, like you mentioned. Can you describe a breakthrough moment or a success story where your coaching directly led to a noticeable improvement in teaching effectiveness?
Yeah. So every day that I go into work, and when I tell people I love what I do and I love going into work, they cringe because to them it's like, who loves that? But every day I see small wins, and that's really something that I focus on, and I celebrate that with the team. So I currently have about 17 staff members that I coach on a fortnightly basis. And there was one particular instance where I had a staff member who was having some challenges with it was a year 10 mixed ability class, and he was teaching a subject called pass, and that was theoretical as well as applied, like sports components, so like a PDHP kind of thing. And he was finding it really, really challenging to engage the learners in the content, particularly when we were in the classroom. Outside of the classroom, he had no issues, but inside the classroom, when he had to facilitate the learning, he had those challenges. So he had come to me during one of our sessions, and we were discussing, how we can further engage the students. And he went on to list a set of options, which is part of the growth goal setting framework. And he listed about 2 or 3. And that, the typical coaching response is there anything else, or what else? And he went, oh, I don't know. What do you think I should do? And in the past, I would have given him a list of things to do and, assuming that was the right thing to do. But instead, with my coaching hat on, I said, you've listed really great options. Let's try one of those. And so he went on to try that. And he saw me 2 weeks later in our scheduled session. And I asked him how he went. And he actually had a smile, and he didn't feel deflated. He wasn't, he didn't feel like this career wasn't for him. And he goes to me, the first time he implemented some of the strategies to engage the students, None of them listened. They weren't interested. They just continued with their typical ways. He goes, but I kept going. I didn't give up. I tried it again and again. And by the end of the fortnight, they were working and completing tasks. He goes, they still need areas of improvement. They weren't working to the capacity that they should be, but there was growth. And I celebrated that with him, and I congratulated him on his consistency, because we know with teaching and coaching is very much like that everything that you do has to be consistent. You can't
Yeah.
try something once and then give up.
Yeah,
So
true,
that was
very
a
true.
great, yeah. So I really enjoyed that, and I thrive on a lot of those experiences now, because it does mean that what I'm doing is meaningful and impactful.
Truly is, from what you're telling, because I'm sure that person might have been very frustrated of how things might have been working, but after that, the like you said, consistency is the most crucial part of it, and that resulted in breakthrough. You also advocate for high impact teaching strategies. Can you walk us through a specific strategy and that might have revolutionized your classroom engagement or student outcomes, and what does it actually mean? Actually, let's start with
Yeah.
what does it mean?
So the high impact teaching strategies are a set of 10 strategies that John Hattie, a professor in Melbourne, Australia, had come to, he put together, and there are specific like points for each of them. And essentially, these 10 strategies allow you to not only have successful classroom environments, but it allows for an increase in student outcomes as well. But, I know you said one, and I can't ever stick to one. I'm sorry. Because I
That's
have
okay.
to.
That's totally okay.
So I have two, and these are my non-negotiables, and I do this currently, and I have done this in the past as well. So the two that I look at are setting goals and structure. And the reason I look at these two in particular for early career teachers is because when we set goals, we implement learning intentions and success criteria for our students to learn throughout each lesson. And within the lesson, they're able to focus on what's expected of them throughout. And then through the teaching of the content, the teacher can identify whether the strategies they've implemented have been effective based on the students' score at the end. And at the end, if they say, Miss, I got, I really understood the concept of a metaphor, probably about 3 out of 5, then we know that they've understood, they understand the basics, but we can maybe further develop them. And we start to differentiate our learning based on how well our students are understanding the teaching of the content. It's also a great reflection tool for the teacher to identify whether the teaching strategies they're using are effective and whether they're suited for that class. So that's why I really focus on setting goals as a first one, because it also allows us to then go, is the teacher reading the program that they're teaching, and then understanding and familiarizing themselves with the expectations of that lesson prior to going in. So that was a really important one that I do. The other is structure, and structure because it's quite linked with the accreditation process, which is one of the standards we follow. And it's essentially the routines that you're developing in the class, and the different activities and strategies that you implement, and how quickly or how often you change them, as well as the transition between each of those activities. So, we know that,
Oh.
so we know that, students learn and maintain engagement for certain periods of time, and their attention span probably lasts like 15 to 30 minutes. Some, if we're lucky, at the year 12 stage, can stay till 45 minutes, and which is what we want them to do. But in the early grades, we need to start to consider, if 15 minutes, if we're teaching something, then students are going to become disengaged, and anything we teach them after that is not going to be retained. So we need to start shifting our strategies and changing the pace of the lesson. So they're the reasons why I always put those two together. I do structure and I do setting goals as non-negotiables with early career teachers.
The next, I think we'll talk about learning walks. You talk about it as a powerful tool. What is it, and how can people practice it? Teachers or educators can practice it, and what does it basically do to the classroom?
Learning walks is not my idea. It's something that's it's around for observations and things like that. And we're very lucky to have access to so many different organizations that have these ideas. And, I was looking at ways to have our early career teachers observe colleagues in a way that, that is it's simplified. And so a learning walk is essentially a group of teachers that come together, a small group that come together, and they have a series of expectations or points that they're going to observe
Okay.
within a lesson. And we have a discussion at first. And so the most recent one I went on, I spoke to the teachers. There was 3 teachers per group. So there's probably about 7 groups in total. So 3 teachers per group. And then in that group, we would discuss what standards. So the standards we looked at were the setting goals from the high impact teaching standards, which links to the Australian professional teaching standards of 3.1. We looked at structure, and we also looked at the standard associated with that, which is 4.2. And then the other is managing challenging behaviors. And so what I wanted to do is really focus on having each individual staff member on a rotational basis observe just one single element in the
Okay.
classes that they go into. And so after we had a discussion and everyone received a sheet of paper that they could write their reflections on as well, we went on for a walk. So we just went into a classroom. The teachers were aware, so it wasn't a random thing. They welcomed me into their classrooms along with the team that I was with. And we just stood at the back of the lesson or at the classroom or onto the side or something. So in a non-invasive, we do not interact with the students at that point. And we just watch. We watch whatever element we were looking at. So if I was looking at standard 3.1, which is the goal setting element, learning intentions and success criteria, as a teacher, I'd be looking for evidence to suggest that this is being done in the classroom. Can we see it in the student exercise books? Is it written on the board? Is it constantly referred to throughout the lesson? If I was looking at managing challenging behaviors, I'd be seeing if anybody is being disruptive and how the teacher would manage that disruption. After all of that, we'd leave the classroom. So no more than 10 minutes in a classroom. And then we'd walk outside. And then straight after that lesson, we'd have a debrief. And each teacher would discuss what they observed. And then once we've all discussed that and everyone's shared their insight, we rotate. So we're no longer looking at the same standard and we move into a next classroom and repeat that process. So once we've done that and we've covered all 3, so everyone's had a turn to observe all 3 components, essentially that's the learning walk done. And then we have what is a learning management system at our school, which is called Canvas. You've probably heard of it. And part of the program is that teachers are being reflective, and anyone that's part of the program that I coach has to, essentially has to reflect. And one of the reflections was that they found it really profound to see how one of the teachers used the learning intentions and success criteria in order to drive the lesson and to progress through the lesson. And that they were really focused on grouping students in a strategic way so that they can engage the learners better. So that was a really interesting reflection that I received. The other reflection that I had was that one of the early career teachers that went on the walk was worried that a noisy classroom would mean that she has no control. And so in one of the classes that she went to, it was quite noisy in there, but the students were very engaged. And so it was a great opportunity for her to reflect on, a noisy classroom doesn't mean that you don't have control. A noisy classroom may mean that students are doing their best learning. It was a great way for them to and use all of that, maybe even shift their mindset or their focus, and then take what they've learned and then implement that in their lesson.
Right. So do you think all of this, I mean, it's a great technique. And I think I think it builds up some kind of a feedback mechanism, if I'm not wrong, right? And I always believe that feedback mechanism is for people who really want the growth or do have a growth mindset. And so it benefits all the peers, it benefits the institution and everything. Do you think this is the time, basically this day and age is the most important time to have these kind of techniques in place, or these kind of coachings, the learnings and everything in place for the teachers, more so than ever?
Yes, absolutely. It is. We're far beyond the point where we're told what to do. So when I started teaching, if I said I needed help, I was just told what to do. It was very directive. It was a very rigid approach, and it sort of places you in a box. And so we don't have our teachers are not like that anymore. And as the ages, the time changes, we need to start adapting to these things as well. We're adapting to the needs of our students. We need to start adapting to the needs of our teachers as well. And if they're more receptive to a coaching approach, which is, a very human way of interacting and communicating and offering feedback, then why aren't we all, already doing this in any organization? So yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, we should be doing.
Yeah, I totally actually believe that. I'm still reflecting on what you said and kind of connecting the dots here.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So we talked about learning works, which is also kind of an observation technique, and it can vary from different sub techniques maybe. What is one innovative observation method that you have introduced, and maybe how did it help the teachers? Like, you can say more than one also. That's totally fine.
Well, thank you for telling me, but I am actually going to stick to one for this one because I love this one. And this was introduced to me probably about 2 years ago. And I completed a course called the Impact Cycle, and it's from Dr. Jim Knight's, one of his workshops, and it was facilitated by Growth Coaching International. And in that, they talk about video observations as an opportunity to provide feedback and for the teacher to reflect on their teaching practice. And so I never had the opportunity up until now to really develop a process on using video observations. And if you see me at work and you speak to any of my colleagues and you ask them, what does Zaynab absolutely love? They'll tell you she loves her video observation, because I walk around like it's my baby and I'm like, do you want to be observed? Because I'm so excited about it, more people are really interested in, that observation process. But the reason why it's so effective is because it takes away from, somebody in a leadership position, which can be quite intimidating for another teacher, sitting
True.
in that room with a clipboard or their laptop taking notes as they watch you teach. And so it moves away from that authenticity of teaching, because if I know I'm being observed, I'm putting on the best lesson you have seen. But if it's an authentic lesson and you've just got a camera in the room, then you're going to teach naturally, because people will naturally fall into default moments anyway. So what we're finding and what I have now is many teachers asking to be observed, both part of the program and those that are out of the program, because they're interested in what they look like teaching. They want to see the perception of themselves and whether or not they are, one, explicit enough in their teaching, whether or not they have a clear structure that is, developed in their lesson, whether or not they are missing certain students, because a video will be able to tell you who's engaged and who's disengaged.
True.
And you've also got the option of, running through in Dr. Jim Knight's text. It's called the High Impact Teaching Survey, right? So it's a high impact
Okay.
teaching survey. It asks you to watch 20 minutes of your video, and then you mark down different points where you were correcting behavior, where you were praising, where you were asking open question, closed questions, all these different things, all the different teaching strategies that you could have used. And so it's a great way to have the teacher reflect on their own practice without me having to tell them about it. But what I do as well is I actually sit with them and I ask them how they perceive themselves. And the first thing I always ask is, I say, what have you done that's really amazing in that session? Because I always like to highlight a success, because that's what we want. We want empowered, we want autonomous teachers that feel like they have self-efficacy, that the true belief in their ability to teach. So I feel like video observations are less invasive, and a great opportunity for them to watch themselves, because we don't get that opportunity. I never got that
True.
opportunity. So yeah, that's something that's being driven at our school, and we're looking at other options to make it a bit bigger too. So
I know that this is for like the educational setup. We are also in that industry, but the thing is that when we look at the companies or the organization and everything, the feedback mechanism comes off as very intimidating. Like you said, that there's somebody observing, and rather than that, people should be able to kind of record themselves if they can and then review it for themselves. I really love the idea that you start off with a feedback, with a positive affirmation or positive question as to what you really liked about it in the video. I think I'm going to adapt it here with my organization here. I'm going to do that.
That's great. I'm glad.
Last but not the least, as we look into the future, we spoke about a lot of things. What do you see as the next big thing in educational coaching? And how do you, how are you preparing teachers or educators that you're coaching to adapt these upcoming changes?
So I have said, over the course of this session that organizations are moving to shift the dynamics of their organizations into a coaching culture. And I know the organization that I work in, and something that I abide by, I live by, is that approach of communicating with one another as an equal entity. And so it will shift the hierarchical structures within organizations. Yes, we still have principals and deputy principals and so on. That won't change, but there won't be this superiority or inferiority complex behind it. We're going to have everybody working cohesively, because there's a respect. It's reciprocated amongst one another, and there's this genuine need for growing each other for their own benefit, not for our benefit. So I feel like, coaching in a lot of organizations is what's going to happen there, where everybody will be trained as a coach, like genuinely trained as a coach, or at least have some sort of skills and capabilities to facilitate a coaching approach. I think that's one. And the other one I wanted to make mention of is that of STEM. I think STEM is going to be very profound. It's going to, a lot of our teaching and a lot of the content that we teach may change as a result of the outcomes of STEM, purely because we are getting students to become more hands-on and to sort of solve problems for real life experiences. And you can't assess that in an exam. You assess that, with something that they build, or perhaps something that they present. So I feel like that's another really important one. And one way that I get the teachers to start to prepare themselves for that is asking them questions about what do they think about STEM. It's just about getting them to, planting that seed. They may have no idea just yet, but planting that seed and saying, what would you feel, or how would you feel if you had to implement a STEM activity in your class? And then just getting them to think. They actually don't have to respond to me, but it's getting them to think about the possibility of a transdisciplinary task or an interdisciplinary task where we're looking at multiple subject areas coming together and developing tasks, activities, and strategies for the students.
Again, project-based learning and practical learning and all of those things come in place. Right. Amazing. I have learned so much from you today. There's a lot that needs to be explored, and there's a lot that you're doing. And I'm thankful for that. You're changing the narrative one person to another. And that's amazing thing that you're doing. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy, and I can't wait for our next conversation.
Thanks for diving into today's episode with the spirited Zaynab. We have spun through the world of education transformation, and now it's time to slide back into our daily life. Hopefully, with a little bit more pep in your step and a toolkit brimming with innovative strategies. Stay curious, keep experimenting in your education adventure, and remember, every classroom can be a playground of learning. Catch you on the next wave of SELINTalks, where education meets excitement. Until next time, I am Shruti Verma, and this is SELINTalks by Selin Club.